For inviting me to this wonderful platform. I have had other friends who've spoken at this platform, and I'm always delighted to be part of such a platform. Today, I want to talk to all of you about one concept that I've been working on for a long time. और मैं पिछले 2 साल से इस concept के बारे में सोच रहा हूँ of India as a civilizational state. Now, what do we mean when we say India is a civilizational state? ये कई बार ये नहीं पता चल पाता है कि सिविलाइजेशन स्टेट का मतलब क्या है, तो उसको पहले कॉन्टेक्चुअलाइज कर लेते हैं। ट्रीटी ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया जब हुआ था इन यूरोप, तो वेस्टफेलियन नेशन स्टेट का क्रिएशन हुआ था। नाउ वेस्टफेलियन नेशन स्टेट का जो मॉडर्न कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ नेशन स्टेट है वो ट्रीटी ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया और वेस्टफेलियन नेशन स्टेट से आता है। और उस कॉन्सेप्ट में था कि क्योंकि यूरोप में बहुत सालों तक प्रोटेस्टेंटिज्म और कैथोलिसिज्म में एक बहुत ही घमासान बैटल हुआ था, इंक्लूडिंग द इन्वेजन, द इस्लामिक इन्वेजन ऑफ यूरोप, ये सारा जो प्रॉब्लम्स था उनका, इंक्लूडिंग मेनी मेनी इयर्स दैट द यूरोपियन प्रिंसिपैलिटीज हैड फॉट विद ईच अदर ऑन द बेसिस इन अ सेंस ऑफ रिलीजन, कैथोलिसिज्म वर्सेस प्रोटेस्टेंटिज्म। तो उसका जो आफ्टर द ट्रीटी ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया व्हेन पीस केम टू यूरोप, उन्होंने एक नया नेशन स्टेट का क्रिएशन किया, दिस न्यू पॉलिटिकल एंटिटी, जिसमें इन अ सेंस देयर वुड बी अ सर्टेन यूनिफॉर्मिटी of culture in each of the states. Language same होगा, या religion same होगा, या ethnicity same होगा. That was the concept of the Westphalian nation state. और जो modern liberal order है, that is a derivative in a sense of the Westphalian nation state. वहीं से हमारा combined with the modern ideas of liberalism, एक जो मॉडर्न लिबरल ऑर्डर जिसको हम कहते हैं, जिसका जो उसका जो क्रिएशन हुआ फॉर द लास्ट मेनी इयर्स, it was a byproduct in a sense of the order that was created in Europe. It was a Western idea. This Western idea circulated around the world, and it believed that the Western idea of liberalism के जितने भी ideas आए थे from the West, those were the fundamental grounds of creating a democratic nation state. When the concept of democracy seeped into this idea, the modern nation state, as far as the West was concerned, was defined by these ideas, that it will be this state which will have no bias against anybody for ethnicity, religion, culture and creed. It will create a framework which will be democratic in nature, and so on and so forth. Now, ये कितना सही है, that is a matter of dispute, because remember, democracy का जो सबसे बड़ा upholder जिस देश अपने आप को मानता है, अमेरिका, in that country even today, no president of America can become president of America without declaring himself to be a Christian. And even today, the office of the President of America actually has morning breakfast prayer meetings, which are really a Christian idea, which is propagated from the very President of America's office. Right? So how far this liberal idea actually percolated in every instrument of the state is a matter of debate. However, in more recent times, with the rise of China, there was a scholar in China called Zhang Weiwei who wrote about the civilizational state. Recently, at the London School of Economics, Christopher Coker, a great scholar of international relations, has also written about the civilizational state. Martin Jacques, the French scholar, has written about the civilizational state. And some of us in India believe that India is a classic civilizational state. Now, what is a civilizational state? Well, a civilizational state is slightly different from the Western liberal order. The Western liberal order believed that a certain set of norms, a certain set of rules, along with capitalism, would be percolated around the world, and that would become the norm. That would be the way every country would finally behave. That's why after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Francis Fukuyama, the great American scholar of politics, wrote this famous book called The End of History, where he said, well, in a sense, history is over. The final political order that we have is liberal democracy and capitalism, and that every country will accept that. And this was the understanding in America and in the West, which is why all the markets opened up to China. The belief was कि एक दिन ऐसा आएगा, if you seep in capitalism and its benefits and industrialization into China, one day China will embrace the political ideals of the West also, including democracy, liberalism, the Western idea of human rights, and so on and so forth. आज हम जानते हैं कि ये नहीं हुआ. This is not what happened. China took all the benefits of the Western liberal order, but it did not accept economically it took all the benefits, but politically it never accepted the framework that the West had to offer. It did not become a democracy. Human rights in China did not become better. We know what is happening even today in Xinjiang. We know what happens to dissidents in China. China never accepted any of those frameworks. And that's why Zhang Weiwei argued that, well, the relationship of the Chinese state with its people is very different, because the Chinese people see the state as an upholder of a unique civilization, which is the Chinese civilization. They don't expect the same things from their government that the Western people or the Western populace expects from their government. The Chinese people want their government, at least that's what Zhang Weiwei argued, want to uphold this unique Chinese culture, this unique Chinese civilization. Christopher Coker took off from that and argued that many countries are posing a challenge to the Western order, including Russia, which argues that, well, this Western framework of the liberalism has no place for religion in it, and religion is important in Russia. So, you know, in a sense, the West is quote unquote godless. Russia is a unique civilization. And these, Christopher Coker said, were actually great challenges to liberalism and the liberal order. And these challenges pose a great threat, in a sense, to the global liberal order, upon which a lot of prosperity in the last many decades have been built, a record fall of poverty around the world, more cooperation, more collaboration. All of this has happened, propelled, Christopher Coker argued, by this liberal order, and the civilization state is a challenge. Now, if the civilization state is indeed a challenge, then it sets up again this collision between the Western liberal order and the civilization state, as represented by China, by Russia, and all these other countries which think of themselves as civilizations. And if India is part of that set, if India is a civilizational nation, then clearly it poses a threat to the Western liberal order. But somebody like me argues slightly differently. I argue that this is only true. What Christopher Coker is saying is only true if the civilizational state, the definition of the civilizational state, is how the Chinese or the Russians look at it. And I argue that India is a civilizational state, but it is a different kind of civilizational state. Because the Indian civilization state has as its bedrock Hinduism, which is at its very core a liberal framework. And therefore, India as a civilizational state does not pose a challenge to, or is not in conflict with the Western liberal order. It can peacefully coexist. And therefore, India's rise, I argue, even as a civilizational state, which is what I think it will be. And by the way, Christopher Coker doesn't agree. Christopher Coker says that India has a large middle class, which is anglicized, which is westernized, and that westernized, anglicized middle class actually does not want a civilizational state. It is far more keen on applying the Western liberal order. Now, I argue that actually there is no dichotomy between the two. India can adopt and coexist peacefully and rise peacefully alongside the Western liberal order and yet be a civilizational state. Now, I give a lot, and this is not a new idea. I argue that this is how India's greatest thinkers about politics and international relations have always considered India's place in the world in that way. And I want to quote a few people to you. And I argue that these were some of the pioneering thinkers of international relations and politics in the 19th and 20th century in India. And they actually conceptualized India as a civilizational state. And they argued, as a civilizational state, India's rise will be peaceful. One of the pioneering people that I want to talk to you about is a man called Binoy Kumar Sarkar, who died in 1949. Now, Binoy Kumar Sarkar in 1916 wrote a famous book. It was called Hindu Culture as a World Power, AD 300 to 600. That was the name of Binoy Kumar Sarkar's book. Now, Sarkar, and this is actually being mentioned also in a wonderful paper that, again, at the London School of Economics, Martin Bailey wrote recently. In fact, in 2010, he wrote about the forgotten history of Indian international relations. And he noted that Binoy Kumar Sarkar, even at that time, even in the early 1900s and the mid 1900s, he was being published by some of the most important and influential foreign policy and political journals in the world. For instance, he was being published by the American Political Science Review, the Political Studies Quarterly, and the Journal of Race Development, an early avatar of what we today know as Foreign Affairs, the publication. Now, Binoy Kumar Sarkar, as Bailey pointed out, wrote a 1916 article in the ASPR, or the American Political Science Review. This was called the Hindu Theory of International Relations. Now, the Hindu Theory of International Relations did a very interesting thing. It brought together many of the pioneering ancient thinkers of India, people like Kautilya or Nandinakya Nitisara. All of these people were brought together into a re-articulation of what liberalization means in a way that the West could understand. Now, how did he do that? It's very interesting. He described that at the very core of the Hindu way of looking at the world is an idea of peaceful coexistence and balance. Balance is very important. Balance of power is very important to the Hindu imagination. And he said that the Vedic texts, in a sense, echo, or actually the Vedic text could be the source of many of the later ideas of peaceful coexistence that the West has spoken of. Let me talk about one of these ideas. Binoy Kumar Sarkar pointed out that the willingness to interpret Vedic text in terms of the canon of Western international thought could be depicted in this manner. For instance, if you look at Sarvabhauma, that this idea of permanent peace could actually be, in a sense, a reflection, or actually be a core idea for the much later Kantian idea of permanent peace. And indeed, these are the ideas that finally brought about the League of Nations, whose later avatar today is the United Nations. This idea of universal peace, this idea of balance of power, creating universal peace between nations, is indeed, Binoy Kumar Sarkar argued, is embedded in the Vedic way of looking at the world. When you look at the world in terms of a peaceful balance of power and means and ideas of how to achieve it, those ideas can later be found in the Western canon of liberal thinking, and they combined together can give a coexistence where civilizational states and the quote-unquote Western liberal order can coexist. Binoy Kumar Sarkar is not the only one. I also want to refer to K.C. Bhattacharya, another masterly thinker of India, again a contemporary
Welcome back, sir. Welcome back.
Sorry, my apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
You can hear me, right? I'm sorry. In Delhi, as you know, in spite of all the promises of 24/7 power, sometimes there is a power failure. So my internet went off for a moment. It'll just be back, but in the meantime, I can continue because I'm connected to my hotspot now. So I was just about to talk to you about K.C. Bhattacharya. Now, K.C. Bhattacharya is a pioneering thinker once again in India. He wrote a famous essay. Called Swaraj in Ideas. Now, Swaraj in Ideas is a masterly essay. K.C. Bhattacharya was a contemporary of Binoy Kumar Sarkar, and I want to talk now a bit about K.C. Bhattacharya's Swaraj in Ideas, because what K.C. Bhattacharya is trying to explain is how India can interact with the West but upholding its own ideas. It doesn't have to borrow ideas. It can merely show how its own ideas reflect and connect to the broader spectrum of Indian liberal thought. Now, in this part of my talk, therefore, from Binoy Kumar Sarkar, I want to move to K.C. Bhattacharya and his famous essay, Swaraj in Ideas. Now, Bhattacharya's ideas, what is Bhattacharya saying? He is not saying something, overtly triumphalist. He's not saying India is the best. He's not saying India, is greater than everybody else. He's saying India is unique. That's a very different argument. And I want to make this argument because reading K.C. Bhattacharya is very important. You see, the way the West understands nationalism, it is always in terms of a triumphalist nature. That, oh, we have to be conquering everybody else. But that's not how Indian nationalism is ever thought. The great thinkers of Indian nationalism have always spoken of India not as the greatest or having beaten anybody else, but indeed as a teacher, as a guide, as a peaceful coexistent partner, as only unique and not necessarily triumphalist. That's a very big difference. Even today, India's argument is not that it wants to beat everybody and become number one, so to speak, but it wants to be a world teacher, a Vishwa Guru. This idea of a Vishwa Guru is a direct reflection of the kind of work that people like Binoy Kumar Sarkar and K.C. Bhattacharya argued that what India should point out as a civilizational state is that it is unique. It has something unique to offer to the world, and that uniqueness comes from its ancient texts, its ancient philosophies, and it comes from many of the ideals of peaceful coexistence that are embedded in its ancient philosophies. I am of the opinion, and I argue, that after Binoy Kumar Sarkar and K.C. Bhattacharya, the other person that I want to talk about in my argument about the peaceful rise of India as a civilizational state, of course, is Swami Vivekananda. Because if there was one person who was one of the most prominent thinkers of the peaceful rise of India as a civilizational state, it is indeed Swami Vivekananda. Because it was Swami Vivekananda who actually went to the West, traveled across the West, and took India's ideas around the West, pointing out why India was unique. This is very important because remember, what is the time that Swami Vivekananda is actually doing this? Swami Vivekananda had the confidence to do this even though he himself was a citizen of colonial India. This is a very big deal, and I don't think we understand what a big deal it is, because as a citizen, it is all very well in 2020 for any of us to make claims of India's uniqueness or India's strengths, because we are, one of the most, powerful economies in the world with a great military and so on and so forth. But to make claims of India's uniqueness as a citizen of colonial India, which Swami Vivekananda did, was a great affirmation of the civilizational strengths of India. And Swami Vivekananda's ideas were very clear that the civilizational rise, and I quote here, has to go beyond the views that are derived from without and do not look within and below the surface. Swami Vivekananda urged that when India thinks about its nationalism and its civilization, it cannot only think of borrowed ideas, it must think of unique ideas that come from deep within, from its very Vedic and Upanishadic core. That is really important, Swami Vivekananda said, and that is the only way India can rise as a civilizational nation. Now, when you think about, let's trace the trajectory, ladies and gentlemen. When you think about the thoughts of Vinay Kumar Sarkar, K.C. Bhattacharya, Swami Vivekananda, one thing is very clear. At no point are they talking about, if I may quote Samuel Huntington, a clash of civilizations. They are not talking about a clash of civilizations. They are talking about a peaceful rise. This is the big difference between, say, China's rise and India's rise. The world is not scared of India's rise because India's civilizational rise is a peaceful rise. Unlike China's rise, which is an acrimonious, aggressive rise, India's rise is a peaceful rise. India does not, for instance, create startups that create spyware around the world. India has never really been accused of planting or conducting espionage in different university campuses. India's rise is a peaceful rise. So my argument is India indeed is a civilizational state, but you have to redefine even what a civilizational state means. And India as a civilizational state is very different from China or Russia as civilizational states. India as a civilizational state is unique because it seeks to rise not as a master, but as a teacher. It seeks to rise not as in glory, but as a guide, as Vishwaguru. I want to argue, ladies and gentlemen, that India indeed is a civilizational state, but it is a very different civilizational state compared to, say, China or Russia. I thank you for your time and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Hindolji. It is a real rare honor for us to have you here. There are some questions. Am I audible? Hello.
My apologies for the sudden, failure of electricity and internet connection for a moment.
No issues. You very unequivocally emphasized on many important points. As we all know that India has always been absorbing influences from all over the world. Like, for example, if we talk of Portuguese who brought croplands like potato and tomato, and we have been accepting all the good and noble things from all over the world. That is the difference which you pointed out. So my question is that why we have lost that civilizational confidence?
I think there are two reasons why we lost that civilizational confidence. One is we were taught that our freedom came through means and measures where it was not very dynamic. We were taught that, oh, well, we were not taught properly how we won independence. We were taught only a Quit India movement and only a Dandi March and a Salt March won us independence. But that's not really true. That's not true. Had there not been revolutionaries, whether in Maharashtra, whether in Bengal, whether in other parts of India, and had it not been for the naval mutiny, our independence would not have come so soon. But children are not taught that in India. You see, our dynamism is never taught. We are always taught, and even Gandhi, most people don't read Gandhi properly, right? Gandhi never said that you should not object, you should only be non-violent. Gandhi said that non-violence is a great ideal, but if you're faced with great evil, you have to take a strong stand. But we are never taught that. We are taught, people slap you in one face, turn the other cheek. But that kills the confidence of a country. If from children are taught from day one in school that your great idea is if somebody slaps you, you turn the other cheek, how will they gain civilizational confidence? Are they taught about valor? Are they taught about bravery? Are they taught about confidence? No, they are not. Are they taught about the great valor that India has? And forget, people say, of course, in medieval India and before, the great warrior Shivaji and so on and so forth. But even if you say more contemporary times, Even if you talk about the independence movement itself, are we talking about Baha Jatin? Who were the people who first bombed the British? You know, the colonial government. Who are the people who first raised an army against the colonial government? We are never taught all these things. We are taught that, well, we peacefully did a salt march and we got independence. But ऐसा नहीं है. ऐसा नहीं था. People gave their blood to win independence. Please read Aurobindo. Right? I'm about to give a lecture in the next few days about the great Chapekar brothers. Some of you who are from Maharashtra would know the Chapekar brothers. Right? You think about all these great people. I mean, why was Savarkar, for instance, the greatest enemy of the British Raj? Because he had the ability to destroy the British Raj. He had the ability to raise men and women who would fight the British Raj actively and destroy it. You tell me how many children in India are taught about the naval mutiny. Had it not been for the naval mutiny off the shores of Mumbai, many of you might be sitting in Mumbai today. I want to tell you, if it wasn't for Indian soldiers mutinying on the ships, British ships, of the shore of Bombay, of Mumbai, the British would not have been as scared as they were. Because remember, Britain was a naval power. And once the naval mutiny happened, they realized if we cannot even secure the bays, the port, and the waterways, the seas, we cannot control India. It is not possible. But Indian children are never taught that, look at the valor, look at the sacrifice of these great soldiers, many of whose names we will never know, of the naval mutiny, which finally, put a death knell, or rung a death knell on the British Empire. I am not saying do not teach Gandhi. I am not saying do not teach non-violence. I am saying let's teach it holistically. Let's have a full picture. So this full picture is never available to us. That's why we have lost the civilizational confidence. How will we access all the, think about it, Binoy Kumar Sarkar and K.C. Bhattacharya were talking about Upanishadic wisdom, as was Swami Vivekananda. But in order to access Upanishadic wisdom, at the very least, you should have been taught some basic lessons, even in translation, English translation, Hindi translation, whatever translation, at your very school level, but nobody's taught that. So how will they know these ideas? I am a big proponent that every school child in India should be taught Sanskrit. Basic Sanskrit. I'm not saying everybody will become a great master in Sanskrit, but basic lessons. Basic lessons should be taught so that they at least know the language basically and can access some of it. I'm not saying everybody will immediately become a master and start writing in Sanskrit and compose something in Sanskrit, but at least they should be able to read. They should be able to understand. They should be able to understand the great lessons and the virtues that are embedded. So that's why we don't have civilizational confidence.
Exactly. So adding one more, just adding to your point that certain things has certainly been erased from our history. Like very few, especially the youngsters, did not know Baji Rao until they saw Baji Rao Mastani, Tanaji. And similarly, the valor of Lachit Barphukan, for example, have never been mentioned in our textbooks. So I would just like to ask you that why there is so much obsession of Indian intellectuals against our civilizational past.
So you are talking about Lachit Barphukan and Tanaji and others, but I want to point out to you that most people barely knew Sardar Patel. Saying Lachit Barphukan and Tanaji were far older. These are older stories, right? Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, there are still people alive in India who have seen Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, right? In our grandparents' generation. We barely knew. Before I wrote my book on Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, for 30 years, nobody had written a big book on Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. You tell me why this is true. 30 years. For 30 years, no big book on Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was written. Let me give you another example. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel at least was a national leader, okay. Let's talk about a man, if at all, even more famous than Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Swami Vivekananda. Before I wrote my book on Swami Vivekananda, one Hyderabad University professor wrote a book on Swami Vivekananda, where basically he argued that Swami Vivekananda was fascist. That was what was being taught in India about Swami Vivekananda. And that professor was given a platform in Tehelka by Tarun Tejpal. And I saw that video and got so angry that I decided that I must write a book to correct all these things. But you see, this was the problem. Whenever something would be written, it would only be negative. So कभी कोई लिखता भी था तो वो फिर demonize करने के लिए लिखता था. And why did I get angry? That man wrote a book on Swami Vivekananda and made the claim that supposedly Swami Vivekananda had no connection with the teachings of Ramakrishna Paramahans. I mean, what can be more absurd and ridiculous than that? What can be a greater lie? So this was what was being taught to people in India. Immediately, one major magazine in India put the book on the front cover. So there is a reason why people like me have come up. Because we were tired and sick and angry. My family has been with Ramakrishna Mission for 3 generations. I was given Diksha at the age of 10. So if I hear such lies, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit at home. Of course not. So this has been, this is what has been propagated in India. For 70 years, this is what we have heard. So once you start saying that, then there is no end. So this is the problem in India.
One thing, generally people, especially when they talk of Hinduism, there's always sort of a pessimistic point of view. So especially when we are discussing the things like caste, so they cite Vedas also, like they cite that in Vedas there is a division of caste and where the Shudras have been kept at the lowest stair. So, I mean, how do you counter them? I mean, definitely many youngsters have not gone very fully through the text, especially the scriptures. So how would you look at it?
So look, there are 2 counters to this. One is a technical counter. The book that is most prominently mentioned as a defense of caste in our ancient text is Manusmriti. But most people don't realize that our texts, there was a very clear idea that our texts were contextual, right? They were created for a particular time, different texts, right? Manusmriti is what is known as a Kalivarjya text. It is not applicable for the Kali Yuga. You see, it is not a text applicable. So if somebody is, number one, who reads Manusmriti, God only knows. I have never seen anybody keep Manusmriti at the house. This is only some intellectuals keep saying, but you please go across India. I have traveled the length and breadth of India. I have never seen anybody keep Manusmriti in their house and read it every day and say, oh, Manusmriti mein ye likha hai, to main ye karunga. No one does that. That's number one. Number two, Manusmriti is a Kalivarjya text. Even on technical grounds, it's not applicable for our age. Number three, no doubt, like many others, there are some problems in the long history of Hinduism. That is because of several things. How caste became rigid because of the invasions that happened, that we don't know the full story of. That needs far more investigation. And I would like to add to that by saying, who were the biggest people? If there are caste atrocities in India, over hundreds of years, from Adi Shankaracharya onwards to Swami Vivekananda, who were the biggest people fighting any of these problems? It was Hindus themselves. Hindus have had a reform movement in every age. If there is any problem in our faith, we have been at the forefront of trying to solve those problems. At the forefront. You tell me any other faith where at every age, from the ancient times to the most modern, I'm saying from Adi Shankaracharya, who sang Chidananda Rupam, Shivoham, Shivoham, everything is Shiva, to Swami Vivekananda, who said that, I am beyond all this and Hinduism is beyond all this, and, the true essence of the Brahman and the Atman should be realized. Every soul is potentially divine. We have had a reform movement in every era, in every age. So why are we not talking about that? If there are problems in Hinduism, Hindus are at the forefront of trying to solve them. continuously in every era. So why should we be apologetic? Because if there are problems, after all, we are human beings, there can always be problems, but we are at the forefront of trying to solve our problems, right? There is no dispute. Nobody can dispute that all these reform movements existed. So we are at the forefront. If there is any problem, we are at the forefront of solving those problems.
One of our viewers is asking that is it feasible for India to rise peacefully with aggressive neighbors like China?
You have to understand what rise peacefully means. It's very simple. Rise peacefully doesn't mean turn the other cheek. Rise peacefully means in your own narrative, you don't have a storyline of threat. Your own narrative is based on equitable behavior. India does not trap other countries in debt and then take over their main assets. It is not India which trapped Sri Lanka in debt and then took over the Hambantota port. Right? If I'm not mistaken, I think the name of the port is Hambantota. I'm quite sure I'm right, but maybe the name of the port might be wrong. But the key port in Sri Lanka, it is not India which trapped Sri Lanka in a debt trap and then took over the port. And this is happening in every part of the world. So in our behavior, there must be equity and justice. That doesn't mean if somebody attacks us, we turn the other cheek. So peaceful rise means that our negotiations and behavior of the world with the world is peaceful, equitable, and just. That we can certainly ensure.
One more question, right from the earliest days of boyhood, we have seen our parents, reading the verses of Ramayana, Mahabharata, but there's a which comes to the thinking man that what is the truthfulness of this? Like there are the places which mentioned in these epics are true, but sometimes many people say that this is a myth, this is not a true event. So how would you look at this?
Look, I per se don't have a problem with the word myth, because a myth merely suggests that if you really look at the origins of the word myth, a myth merely suggests that there were certain things that happened at a particular time, and over many years, people have given different interpretations to it, and the story has continued, right? We look at Ramayana and Mahabharata Itihasa, as many of you would know, right? Which literally means that which happened. And there is no doubt that there is some grains of truth to this, of course, if you look at the Bhandarkar lectures, given by the great, I'm forgetting his first name. I think was it R.D. Bhandarkar, I forget. But anyway, if you look up the Bhandarkar lectures, there's this wonderful, I quote this in Being Hindu. My memory is slipping me by at the moment, but my book Being Hindu mentions this in great detail. The Bhandarkar lectures mention this with great clarity, that please understand our great texts have key places, whether it's Ayodhya, whether it's Kurukshetra, each of those places are actually existing even today. There is a direct journey, a historical journey, if you will, of public memory, of citizens' memory, of people's memory for thousands of years about these places and incidents. Now, you may say over many years, some of these things got embellished and new stories came up. That's fine. That always happens in oral tradition. But at its core, that there is some grain of truth to it is undisputed. Because at the end of the day, you cannot deny that even today there is Ayodhya. The Ayodhya that is mentioned in the Ramayana exists even today. The Kurukshetra that is mentioned in the Mahabharata exists even today. That memory, unbroken for thousands of years of a living tradition, exists. Now, you may say that, well, I don't know whether this exact incident mentioned in the Ramayana happened or that exact incident mentioned in the Mahabharata happened. That is oral memory, has, people interpret in different ways. People have new ideas. People look at things in different contexts. That's fine. But that there is a grain of that which happened, which is the literal translation of Itihasa, in this is undisputed.
Thank you so much, Hindolji. I mean, it was really a very thought-provoking and enlightening session. I forgot to introduce, uh, I forgot to introduce. Many viewers might not have been. So may I have a brief introduction? I would like to that Hindolji is an award-winning author of 9 books, which includes Being Hindu, for which he got Wilbur Award in 2018. His books, The Man Who Saved India, which is the biography of Sardar Patel, won the prize of the best work for non-fiction at the Value of Words Literary Festival in 2019. His book Recasting India was nominated for prestigious Hayek Prize in 2015. Some of his exceptional writings are there in The Modern Monk, which is a biography of Swami Vivekananda, The Sacred Sword, The Legend of Guru Gobind Singh, who was born in Patna, my birthplace too. He is currently Vice President of Invest India. He was educated in South Asian history and politics at Oxford as a Chevening Scholar. He has been Knight Pagahut Fellow in Business and Finance at Columbia University in New York. He also holds a degree in journalism from Jamia Millia Islamia. He was selected as young, he also holds young leader by World Economic Forum in 2017, and he has also been in capacity of editor at large in Fortune India. So it was really great honor and privilege for us to have you here, sir. And we would like to engage you and we would like to hear you again and again. Thank you so much for your session.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me. My apologies once again for this short break in my connection due to some electricity and internet connection problems. Uh, this happens sometimes. My apologies for that. And also, I finally looked up while you were introducing me. The name of the pot indeed is the Havantota pot. I just wanted to get that right. And the Bhandarkar lectures, if any of you want to go and read it, it's the D.R. Bhandarkar lectures. Please go in. It's a blue covered book, the D.R. Bhandarkar lectures on ancient India. If you want to know more about the connection of Ramayana and Mahabharata as Itihasa, please read the D.R. Bhandarkar lectures, which I have found fascinating and which I quote extensively in my book, Being Hindu. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.